Hello and welcome to another Newly Exchange. I'm Jill, and as always, I'm joined by Angie.
Hi there, everyone. It's good to be here again today.
For anyone who's new to these sessions, they are really just conversations. We definitely don't pretend to have all the answers. We are not clinicians, and we're certainly not here to tell anyone how to parent. We are just two parents sharing our own experiences in the hope that something we say might make you think, oh, actually, that's not just us. Over the years, we've learned that every family is different, and what worked for us might not work for you, and that is absolutely fine. Take whatever is helpful from what we talk about and leave the rest. This week, we're going to talk about something that so many parents have asked us about. It's that you've finally got through the assessment process, and now what? We know you spend months, sometimes years, usually years, waiting. There's all the forms, the appointments, the endless questions, the meetings, and you become so focused on getting to that assessment that you almost imagine that's the finish line, and after that, everything will come easy. But actually, then you get there, and sometimes after an assessment, you walk out feeling relieved. Sometimes you're emotional, and sometimes you're just still trying to process it all and take it all in. Um, and sometimes, if we're honest, you get home and think, what happens now? Because sadly, nobody gives you a nice, good roadmap of here's all the help that you can have. It's very much down to us as parents and carers to find out what we do next. So often you're left wondering who's supposed to do what? Who do you need to tell? What will school do? Will they suddenly understand your child, and will there suddenly be lots of support coming? Um, and if you've been through the assessment process and you didn't get the outcome you were hoping for, we know that's even harder, particularly if you were looking for, a diagnosis of autism or ADHD. So we thought we'd have a bit of a chat about it today, not because we've got all of the answers, but just because we've both been through it. We've both had those moments of thinking, right, I've got the diagnosis. Now, what on earth can I do with it? So we know that getting a diagnosis and being on the pathway towards one and going through an assessment can bring up a whole lot of emotions. For some families, you do have that relief because there's finally an explanation. Someone else recognizes what you've been seeing. But for others, you might still have that uncertainty, especially if you were hoping for some clearer answers and you don't get those. It's completely normal to feel guilt or sadness or worry or fear or anger or just really overwhelmed by it all. Those feelings don't mean that we love our children any less, but often they just come from recognizing that life might be more challenging for our children than we thought, particularly when you get that, a diagnosis of autism or ADHD. And we talk about this a lot on one of the courses that we run for parents and carers because it's really important to acknowledge how you're feeling without judging yourself for it, knowing that how you're feeling, there are so many other families feeling exactly the same way. And above all, after an assessment process, it's important just to be kind to yourself, to know that you don't have to have everything figured out all at once. Just focus on the next step and then the one after that. It's all you can do, isn't it? I think.
It is. You can't focus on everything all at once because you'll drive yourself mad, It's just those little tiny steps, those little tiny things that you're going to change and just take it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time. I think it's all you can do. I think parents sometimes put pressure on themselves to feel a certain way. I felt all of those emotions you listed and probably more, and what about families who are still waiting for answers? And they perhaps they didn't get the answers they expected. Can they experience all those emotions as well?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think you have that frustration and that sometimes that anger, because especially if you've waited, like in this area, it can be 3 years to get through to the assessment process. If you've waited all that time in your child's life and then you still think, you're not getting the answer you want, and you're living this every single day, you know that your child needs something different. And often you're just waiting for other services to recognize that too. And we know that it shouldn't happen, but it does happen that some schools seem to want a diagnosis before they will fully acknowledge a child's needs. Should always be done on what your child needs, not a piece of paper with a diagnosis. But the reality is that it's not always that way. And for those families who don't receive a diagnosis, it can be so disappointing. I think disappointing doesn't even come close to how they feel. But it is worth remembering that clinicians are making a decision that will stay with your child for life. You know, a diagnosis is a lifelong thing, and they have to be 100% confident in that diagnostic criteria being fully met. You know, if there's a little bit of uncertainty, then they might say, let's wait a year or two and then try again. And I know as a parent how frustrating that can be because you know what's going to happen. And we certainly, you know, in the work that we do in supporting families, we see the frustration and, you know, that referring straight back in because you just know. And often it does end up in a diagnosis. Um, but actually, it's all that time and other people not fully understanding. So I think, you know, even if you don't get a diagnosis, what you need to do is kind of recognize that it doesn't mean that your child's needs and challenges aren't real, you know, they are absolutely real. And I think it's about having to sadly continue that journey. You can appeal decisions, you can go back and sort of push back on that, but sometimes it is about taking a little bit more time, gathering more evidence. But I appreciate for parents and carers how awful that experience is when you've sort of pinned everything on getting that diagnosis. It's tough, isn't it? It's really tough.
It is, and I think that whichever way it goes, there will be um sort of like nuggets of information within those reports that will help you sort of like move forward. So I think whichever way it goes, you can pull something positive out of it once you've got over the emotion of that. You know, do you remember what it felt like for you?
Felt like, I think for my son, which seems ridiculous now because it's so obvious, but I was young, he was young, and I just remember just feeling almost shock. I couldn't quite process it. Like I was relieved, a little bit of me was relieved, but I was really shocked. And I was really sad because I just thought, I wanted life to be easy for him at the time. You know, I didn't know much about autism back then. I've learned an awful lot and can see, you know, all the positives. But then I was worried because he was already really struggling at the age of 6 and life was really challenging. And I remember just thinking, really, and just thinking how sad it was and feeling really sad. And, but also expecting everything to fall into line and that everyone would suddenly it'd be a magic wand and he'd get all the help and support he needed and I wouldn't have to fight, um, which also was a bit of a learning curve. But when it came to my daughter, because I've been through it with my son, sort of, goodness me, I don't know, 10 years earlier, I suddenly was ready for it and I was prepared and I was like, if they dare say it's not, because she's a girl and it wasn't as obvious, but I was ready to fight, thinking, if they don't recognize this, I'm gonna, you know, lose my mind slightly. So I was ready and but even then, even after all of that, I still felt a little bit sad. I was still, oh, even though I knew it, I still felt sad. I don't know. How about you? What did you feel?
There's a lot of emotions attached to it, isn't there? You know,
Yeah.
excuse me. I think that there's a lot. As you say, it's about being kind to yourself and things and that as well. I think I was less certain which way it was going to go because they asked us for more information on the day that it went to panel. And I think so I was less certain which way it was going to go. So I think I was just in that shock, first of all, to be perfectly honest.
It's just insane, isn't it? How the pressure for that one
Yeah.
meeting to get it right.
Yeah,
And
exactly that. And my daughter was a teenager at the time, so we've had all the years up to that. I know your son was only 6, but mine was like a teenager. It's quite often with girls. And I'd done all the life up to that. And I thought, shock because how could I have not have known this? But I don't
yeah,
know. Yeah, it was definitely a shock, first of all.
yeah, it does take some time to process. I think as my son got older, he got other diagnosis and he got sort of a mood disorder diagnosis. And then I felt like I'd just been dropped at the bottom of the ocean. And it took me a good year actually to feel like I'd resurfaced and I could start dealing with it and processing everything because it just felt so much. So I think there is no right or wrong, however
No,
you feel. And I think
exactly
that's what
that.
we've learned. You know, it's really down to the individual and however you feel about it is okay. So once you've had a bit of time to process everything, one of the biggest changes often isn't your child, it's just about how we begin to understand them. You know, diagnosis, as we've said before, doesn't change who they are. they're the same child they were before, but what it helps to do is just change the lens that we look at them through. You might find yourself looking back at situations with fresh eyes. Things that felt confusing or difficult at the time start to make sense. So rather than asking, why did that happen? You might start asking, what was my child trying to tell me? Which is a good way to kind of spin it, I think.
I think that's something that so many parents relate to. I know I looked back at different moments and thought, oh, if only I'd understood then what I understand now, and it can bring a bit of guilt with it, can't it?
Oh, it definitely can. Parent guilt is a real thing. I think we could do a whole newly exchange just on that. But I think is what we always say, you can only make the decisions based on what you knew at the time. And it's not about looking back and judging yourself. It's about taking what you've learned and using it to make life a little bit easier going forward. Because there's no point, is there? You
No,
go
there's not.
insane.
And that's where the real shift can happen. And instead of trying to sort of like think about changing your child to fit whatever system or whatever experience they're going through at the moment, you start to understand what they need a bit more.
Yeah, you definitely do. The questions become different, don't they? It's, what
Mm.
helps my child feel safe? What situations do they find difficult? What helps them recover after a difficult day? And really importantly, what are their strengths? Think about what you can do differently to help them succeed. And so it is about understanding your child as an individual. Diagnosis won't tell you everything. It's just the beginning of learning what life looks like for your child and not necessarily what a textbook says. You've got to figure it out for you and your family.
Yeah, what's right for you, your family, your children, all of that goes into the mix. So nobody can, tell you exactly how to do that. It's just about trial and error, isn't it?
Yeah,
Really, you know.
massively.
Where do you suggest that parents start?
It's a tricky one. I think start by being curious. We keep saying that, notice what seems to help, what seems to make things harder. Look for patterns without trying to analyze every single moment. Think about what happened before something became difficult, what your child might have been trying to communicate at the time and what helped afterwards. Those little observations over time build a much clearer picture of your child, much clearer than any report could give you. I think if you just have the report and that's all you're going on and you're not having that flexibility, you're making it harder for yourself and for your child. But actually just really focusing on your child, observing, looking at, you know things, patterns, that's what's going to help. And that's kind of what every course I've ever done tells you, to really observe and watch and be curious, and that's how you make those positive changes,
Yeah,
for sure.
definitely.
So after a diagnosis, one of the first questions is that kind of, how do I tell my child? We have a lot of families that come to us that ask that, and there is no right age or perfect moment. Every child is different, and you'll know your child the best. For many children, understanding they're autistic can actually be a relief, or if they have ADHD, it gives them a way of understanding why some things feel easier and why some things are a bit harder for them. And it helps them see that they are not broken or wrong. They just experience the world differently. It's that classic thing of, some people are Macs, some people are Windows, you know, some people use Android, some people use Apple, just a slightly different way of processing things. But nothing is wrong. It's just a different way. And in our house, it's a strength. I have two neurodivergent children, a neurodivergent husband, and I am in awe of them and the skills they have and the strengths they have. And I think, God, I wish I could have that power and, that ability to see the world slightly differently that they do. Um,
Yeah, definitely. For mine, it's like that overall overwhelming sort of concentration. That if there's something going on and concentrating on that one thing, I wish I could have that concentration to just do that one thing, and to the exclusion of everything else.
yeah,
It is a bit of a bit of a power. I think the important thing is though is that it shouldn't feel like a big secret if they've got a neurodivergence diagnosis.
yeah, I agree. And I know some parents sort of have that sort of conversation with themselves about whether to even tell their child. And that obviously is a personal thing. In my experience in the families we've supported, having that conversation is really important. And it doesn't have to happen all at once. It can grow over time, answering
Mm.
questions as they come along and just helping your child understand themselves is positive, but do it in an age appropriate way. My son was only 6 when he got his diagnosis, as I've said, and we made it really positive. We found some really good books, which we focused on reading with him, and they looked at his strengths particularly. And then we had a chat about some of the things he struggled with and why. But we mostly kept it really positive, and it just helped all of us understand why some things were a bit harder for him, and that really helped him. And it does now as a young adult. He's really confident in his diagnosis and who he is, and that helps so much. I don't know about you. How was it for you?
So I think, as I said, my daughter was a teenager,
Yeah.
so there was a lot of like teenage hormones going on, and not wanting to appear different to everybody else, not wanting to be different than everybody else. And actually, I asked her what she wanted to know about the outcome, and she said to me she didn't want to know, first of all. She
Yeah.
said, so I said, okay, so what can I do for when you do want to know, sort of thing? What do you need to do? She said, can you just write it down in a letter, put it in my top drawer, and then when I want to read it, I'll go and read it. And that's what I did. I
Bless
wrote
her.
not a lot, not a lot, just a few basic facts and the diagnosis sort of thing in a letter, and I put it in a drawer, and it stayed there for a few months.
But I think
Then
that's,
when she was, when she was ready, she got to it. So
yeah,
it's different when they're younger, when they're old, it's listening to them and what they want as well.
that's it.
And now as an adult, she totally understands who she is, where she fits in the world, what her neurodivergence means to her and everything, and is quite comfortable with it. But it's doing what is right for your child, your family at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a lovely way of doing it. My daughter was 8 when she got diagnosed. She's 14 now. At 8, she just wanted a yes or a no, and then she didn't want to talk about it. To this day, none
Yeah,
of her friends know. She's not ready at 14 for other people to know. She'll talk about it to us, and she'll say things about being autistic or having ADHD to us, but she doesn't want anyone outside of the family to know or to discuss it. It's, very personal to her still. She's lucky,
yeah,
I guess,
yeah,
that we're very positive about it in the family, and it's just the norm here. There's more people
yeah.
that are neurodivergent than aren't. But again, a bit like you, were taking it at her speed. It's up to
And
her
that's all
how and
you can
when.
do,
Yeah, it really is.
you know.
Um, it definitely is. One of the questions that we're often sort of asked about is like who we tell. And for some families, we know that telling other people, telling other family members can be positive, but actually it's not always positive. And I think that's okay to kind of acknowledge that and to know that it can be a difficult journey for some. Um, and some people are worried about, whether their child might be seen differently, whether family or wider community might only focus on the diagnosis, whether they're going to understand, whether they're going to judge you as a family, or whether they're just going to dismiss it, and say the classic thing that Angie and I both said: they'll grow out of it. It's okay. They'll grow out of it. Um, but I think it can be really hard knowing how to then, when you've got that diagnosis, how to share it with other people. Can you remember who you first told about when you got the diagnosis?
Think first of all, it was the Senko at the school who'd been involved in like obviously putting the information, together and that. But I actually absolutely said to her that, my daughter didn't want to know the outcome. So just,
Yes.
so that you can put the things in place sort of thing, but don't discuss it in front of, anybody or whatever, because that would have been mortifying for her as a
Yeah.
teenager. It absolutely would. I think I also rang the GP surgery because even though I knew the report was going to go on to them, sometimes these things get missed and all of that. So I think that was the first ones I sort of like actually told. Oh, and our siblings. That
Yeah.
was it. First of all, yeah.
Yeah. I think we did very similar. Very, very similar.
So what about when people don't see the same things you see? Maybe school or family members say they don't notice anything.
Yeah. I think it's something many families experience. We talked in the last exchange about different people seeing your child differently, and that your child might manage in one environment but struggle in another. That classic thing of holding everything together at school and then getting home and everything being much more difficult. And like we said last time, family members only see your child for a short period of time, so they, you know, don't necessarily get the whole picture. So telling them that your child has a diagnosis can sometimes come as a bit of a shock to them. And I think it can be really hard to accept that other people might not necessarily understand what that means. I think it's really hard if people feel that perhaps you've pushed for it. And I definitely remember getting that vibe from people that it was me that pushed for it, and that if I hadn't, they would never have got a diagnosis. I think that judgment, even from family, can be really challenging.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something we have to each come to sort of like terms with ourselves and try and pick your battles, know which ones you have to fight and know which ones you just have to let go, you know. But sort of like thinking back to those early days, sort of like afterwards, where do you start? Are there people that parents should definitely speak to?
Yeah, I think there are. So for me, school or nursery, because they are with your child so much, I think that's a really important place to start. Once you, particularly, I mean, you can tell them straight away. It obviously takes a few weeks to get the written report, but I would start. I think I was in there the very next day.
Yeah, me
I
too.
think I think I spent the evening typing up what was discussed and went in with a list of things that they needed to be doing, because that's sort of annoying parent I am. But school or nursery, family members who have a lot to do with your young person, when you are ready for it, if you are, again, your journey, your decisions, and be led by your young person. But if they're heavily involved with looking after your young person, then it might be worthwhile speaking to them. If you've got childcare, a childminder or an after school club, that kind of thing, definitely worth having a conversation with them. Clubs or activities that your child might be going to, if you think it's needed, then they're good people to talk to. And trusted adults, other people that work with your child and might just need to know a little bit more about them and what's going on. And the goal is to build that circle of understanding around your child, so people who get it and understand it. And if you don't know how to tell them, then have a look online. There are some really good videos explaining autism and ADHD. I used to send those to people, particularly in the early days, just to say, this is what it means, because, love my parents dearly, but they wouldn't necessarily understand what that meant. But there are some great videos that explain it really succinctly, what that might look like. And I think it's also good to be aware, even though you're talking to school, that having a diagnosis doesn't mean things will suddenly change. It doesn't mean that you're going to get an EHCP. EHCPs have never been based on a diagnosis. They're always based on need, and some children need them and some children don't. But I know, that we have families that think that because they've got a diagnosis and now they're getting EHCP, or now school will put everything into place. And it shouldn't be that way. It should, it's always based on needs. So your child should already be getting an awful lot. But I think just kind of managing that expectation that it's a huge thing for us, but when we share it with other people, it doesn't necessarily always, it's not
Mm.
always a huge thing for them. And that can be hard sometimes too. Um,
Is, and the emotion that it brings with it as well. And I think that casually dropping videos and information and books is a really good way. I found it worked with my daughter as well, just to leave things around the room or send little clips to or whatever,
yeah,
because it helped her as a teenager, understand herself without having to have that direct conversation with me at that
yeah.
time, which was so difficult.
Yes, yeah, I think that's such a good idea. There is so much out there. Again, pick carefully, find some reputable places. There are some good, charities and organizations producing some really good information. So be careful about what you're getting and what you're sharing, for sure. I think in terms of practical things to do, after an assessment or even while you're waiting, it can be difficult to know what you're doing next. It feels like you've got all this information but no clear plan. So what we want to start doing is turning that information into action, having a bit of a plan and doing something with it. Yeah.
When families get pages and pages, what can be pages and pages of a lengthy report, what should they actually do with it?
I think read it, but it doesn't have to be straight away. You don't have to read it immediately and think that you're going to remember everything. I think it's embarrassing to confess, but I think I read ours once and then it got put into a file. It just felt so overwhelming to read it all that I think I've definitely skipped to the end to see like the bullet point notes. But it felt like too much. But what I did do was look at the key points. I looked for, the strengths, the things that they find difficult, and the recommendations and the strategies that were suggested, because I think those were the key things that I needed. And I really used mine to make sure that school knew what they needed to do. I knew, because the reality is schools don't have time necessarily to read a really long document. And teachers, particularly, your Senko might, but doesn't mean that a class teacher will. So I made a one-page summary of it. time to say how Neuly can help you with that. They can definitely summarize some of those things. But I think if you can turn that report into something really useful, something really practical, what your child needs to know, what your people need to do to help your child, that's like the crucial thing. And having it in a one page, I used to do a strengths, things they find difficult, what you can do to help, with a photo of my child, especially when they got to secondary school, because I think that helps teachers remember who you're talking about. But something practical that can then be used and how that can be sort of translate into the school environment can make a real difference from it. Don't expect schools to read it all and then put everything into place. I think you do need to kind of push and review and meet and keep that communication really open.
Think you were probably much more organized because of your education background. I think
That
that
is true.
when I think back to and that sounds great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like criticizing it. I
Yeah,
think that's that like that was very unorganized. I think for me, I looked at the explaining in layman's terms the details why my daughter was struggling socially so much, and because that was impacting huge parts of her life at the time. So I think that's all I focused on at that time was this is impacting school, home, out of school life, everything. So this is the reasons why, and this is what we could try and help her with that. I think that's all I did with it
yeah.
first of all.
But that's okay too. I think it is all about us as individuals, as parents, whatever
Yeah,
works for us. For me,
for
to this
us,
day, doing stuff, being proactive, having goals, typing stuff up, that helps me feel
that
like I'm
helps.
doing
Yeah,
something when my kids are really struggling. And they are, my daughter, particularly at the moment, is finding life really challenging. And so the fact that I've got something to focus on and do makes me feel like I'm helping, even if it's not, it keeps my brain
yeah,
busy.
and
But
totally
there's
that's
no
fine.
right or wrong, is there? It's
No,
about whatever works for you as an individual, without a doubt.
yeah, totally. It's totally down to you, your situation, your expectations, everything. So, what about school support? Does everything depend on having a diagnosis, do you think?
No, it absolutely shouldn't, and it's really important. And I think certainly in our area, it is moving away from that, but there are still one or two schools that want a diagnosis before they'll put into things into place. But it absolutely should not be based on a diagnosis, and it isn't for benefits as well. It's all based on needs. If you're looking, for disability living allowance, that is based on needs, not a diagnosis. So I think in terms of schools, what you can do is talk about what support is already in place, because hopefully they've not just waited for things to be put in place for an assessment. There should be things in place already. In a lot of areas in the UK, there's a document called the Ordinarily Available Provision, and that document has been written by the local authority to talk about what schools should be doing without the need of a diagnosis, without the need of an EHCP. And it's a long document, certainly in this area, it's really long. It's got lots of practical things that schools can be doing. So there's lots they should be doing, lots of adjustments they should be making. They should be looking at, what barriers there are to stop your child from learning, and how are they reviewing what's going well, what's not working so much. And I think as a parent, before you've got a diagnosis, because it's based on need, but also once you've got a diagnosis, the Equality Act from 2010 is all about reasonable adjustments. And that is about reducing barriers and helping children access and adults access opportunities. So that might be changes in communication, it might be extra processing time, visual support, sensory adjustments, movement breaks, supports with transitions or changes to the environment. There are so many things that can be done, little changes that make a massive difference to our child and our children. And so, as a parent, knowing your rights and that you are allowed to ask for this and that schools should be providing this, anywhere should be providing this if your child needs it. I think knowing that right is quite empowering, personally.
It is indeed. And I think the ordinarily available provision document I use even now as a prompt of what you can ask for, sort of thing. There's so much
Yeah.
information in there. And if your region doesn't have one, just look for one for another region and just go through that. There's a really good prompt for what you can ask for. And it makes me think about, oh, actually, that might work. Let's try that.
Yeah.
Um, it can be so tough on parents. You expect a diagnosis to open doors and there to be lots of support afterwards, but there often isn't anything more than a report. So, what other support could or should parents be looking into?
Yeah, I think that was one of the hardest things. Sometimes you might get sent a list of things to look at, but it's still really challenging. Generally, certainly from our experience, I think every council now has to have a local offer on their website. And if you Google that and you search for your area and the local offer, that will give you a list of things in your area that can help in different types of need. You might have to do a bit of searching, but the local offer is a really good place to find out what's available locally. If you are having issues with education, then you have what is known as, and it will be slightly different depending on the area, but often it's an independent advice support service. In our area, it's called SendIAS, which is send and then information advice support service. It might have a slightly different name where you are, but they will help you with the legal side of things with schools. They're independent and they can help give you advice if things aren't going so well with schools. Also, in most areas, you have parent care forums that are there to represent families, and they will often be doing some amazing activities, so you can get involved with those. There will be support groups. There may be short breaks or local services that you can access. Again, that's really dependent on where you live, and it can be hard to get. So just be aware of that. In terms of financial or practical support, it might be that you decide to go for disability living allowance if you're eligible, and that's something you can have a look at. It's a long old form. They don't make it easy, but it's worth looking at. And again, you don't need a diagnosis for that, but any paperwork you've got to support your claims, so an assessment can be really, really helpful. It might be that you're eligible for carers allowance, and again, that's something to look into. But other support based on your child and family circumstances. I think eligibility is often about needs and impact, not a diagnosis. But you need to look at the finer print on all of those things, and see if it's right for your family, because it varies from family to family. But those are some of the things that you can get fairly easily.
Think for me, out of that list, the most empowering, the most useful to me was going to a local support group and finding other parents, finding my tribe, so to speak, other people that had gone through or were going through the same thing as me, and drawing on their experiences. And it helps with that feeling of isolation, of feeling alone. And I know it's really hard to do, to walk into a support group the first time, but actually if you can get the courage to do it, that was the most useful thing to me, and it's something I would always advocate for.
Yeah,
You
yeah, me
know.
too.
Yeah. So what do you think the biggest thing families can do from today, from now?
I think make a list. As I said, love a list. Think about what you want to do, who you want to tell. Take it one tiny step at a time when you are ready. Start building a picture of your child. Keep track of what helps, what doesn't help. Keep a note of conversations, of meetings. Just write it down. Keep track of emails. I save all my emails into one place because you never know when you might need them, particularly with schools and professionals. And be aware, of what support is agreed. Work with schools to have that good communication, be a team together to help your child if you possibly can, and know that they're going to change over time. But also, it helps making a list of questions you might have and who you can ask for them. Just remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Just start with the useful next step, because it becomes overwhelming if you're trying to do it all in one big hit. So, one step at a time for sure is the
And
key thing.
that questions you want to ask, for me, was always the big thing, because I'd start talking about my daughter, and we'd have conversations, and I would forget what I wanted to ask. So before I went into any meeting or anything like that, I always had a list of questions I want to ask. And before I'd let the meeting end, I'd say, "Oh, actually, I'm just going to consult my list to make sure we've covered everything that I wanted to cover."
Yeah, good. Yeah. And I think don't be afraid to do that. We can be very polite, we can
Mm,
be very smiley, but you need to be assertive. It's not always easy fighting for our children. And so having the confidence to do that is a big step. And I think of who I was right back at the start 14 years ago.
mm.
And now I'm a very, very different person. I'm very confident in advocating for my children because I've had to be. I think you get tougher over time. Um, and once you start understanding your child's needs, then absolutely knowing where to go for help is the next step. And like you were just talking about, it's not always the official groups. It can be, voluntary sector, and those local support groups can be incredible at this time. We know it's really overwhelming because you're suddenly expected to navigate this whole new world of information and services and systems, but actually finding people who get it can make a world of difference. It's why we've started the Neuly support group on Facebook. You can see the nice little link to it there, Neuly Family Support. because finding people who truly understand is a game changer. Someone who you don't have to explain that actually Christmas Day isn't that much fun in our house. It's a bit of a nightmare. People who know why you don't have birthday parties because they're overwhelming and they're so stressful, and how sad you might feel about that as a parent. People who know how hard it is just to get your child out of the door to go to school, and that you might arrive at a support group in floods of tears. And that's fine because people understand it, people get it. We're all living that life as well. When someone says, "Oh, that happened to me," it just makes such a difference, and you just
Mm.
stop feeling like you're completely alone, and you realize that there's a whole tribe of other people on this journey as well, and that is really empowering. And I was the person who wouldn't go to support groups, which is ironic considering now we run lots of support groups. But I found them really overwhelming. I just found it too much. But actually now, once I got into the right place, they're so much better, and I really get so much from it. And actually, most of my friends now are from support groups because they're people that live this life and they get it. And it changes everything, I think.
It does. I think that's so important. When you find those people who understand you, you stop spending all your energy trying to justify your child's behaviour or your parenting or anything, to be quite honest. Well, you've not brushed your hair today. Um, Instead, you can share ideas, but then learn from each other and realise that so many of the things you've worried about are the things that other families have faced too. And you don't need a diagnosis to access these groups. And while it can be daunting, just taking that first step is really important. It can be really amazing, the support that you get out of it.
Yeah, it really can, I think. And if you can't get physically to one, find the online communities, the groups that are out there that are supporting each other online can be just as powerful. So there's so much out there, but I think it is about one step at a time because it can be overwhelming thinking you've got to do all of this at once. Um, it can be just too much. So I think one thing I wish I'd done sooner was keep everything in one place in terms of my child's journey. If I think back to the very start, but when you're first starting out, you think you'll remember everything. But actually, what happens is before long, you've got reports and you've got appointments and you've got emails from school and notes you scribbled down after a phone call. I still have random pieces of paper where I just found a piece of paper and scribbled it on. And you have advice from different professionals and things you've picked up from other parents. And actually, what that becomes is a bit of a paper trail, and keeping a paper trail is absolutely vital. Um, it makes such a difference, doesn't it, if you have a paper trail?
It really does. I remember thinking, I'm sure somebody told me that, but I couldn't remember who or where I'd written it down. I was writing on backs of envelopes. I was like, post-it notes, like, everything. But it does make a massive difference to keep that paper trail.
It does. I literally did that this week, even though I have folder upon folder for my children of all the information. And I try, even if I do scribble it on an envelope, I whack it in the folder, even if I just stick it in so I know it's there. But literally this week, I was trying to find an email that said a crucial bit that I needed. We've just taken my daughter out of school and I needed that one reference and I couldn't find it. And I spent 3 hours searching and my husband was searching and I found it the next day, but the stress it caused because I really needed to
Mm.
find that one detail. So trying to be organized actually can be really important. Um, because before you know it, you've got all of these school meetings and clinic letters and strategies, and having it all in one place makes a huge, huge difference, doesn't it? Because you might not need it today, but you might need it in 6 months' time.
Exactly that. And it's not just the paperwork that, you're building, is it? It's your child's story. The little things that you notice over time often end up being the most valuable. And we know that to get things like education, health and care plan, if it's needed, you need that paper trail to have that evidence, but sort of like based there. So those things of noticing, what's happened and why it's happened and understanding it a bit more can sometimes help with that.
Yeah, and following up meetings that are all verbal with an
Mm.
email to say, this is what we discussed, this is what we agreed, and then sending that back to school. So you've got some evidence of it because you never know when you might need it. I'm years on and I've needed it in the last year, and I'm really glad that I save every email. I mean, going right back to when my daughter was in year one and she's now year 10, and but I've still got it and I needed it this year. I absolutely needed it. So I think if you haven't got it, don't panic. There's always a way around. But if you're at the start of your journey, getting into that habit of keeping information, if you can keep it in a file or keep it online, keep it with Neuly, of course, as well. There's all this stuff that you out there now to help you keep track of things, find a way that works for you. Because having things in one place just makes all the difference, and it just stops so much of the stress in what can be stressful life sometimes. So we've mentioned Neuly, of course, but actually this is the reason we're involved in Neuly, because we can see how helpful it can be. I love the fact that you can keep a record of what's happening with your child day to day, and it automatically creates a profile that you can share. I think I really love that. I think that's so helpful.
Yeah, we're definitely. And the fact that you can talk to on WhatsApp if you want, so it can remind you of things or check in with you how things are going.
Yeah. And the more you talk to it, the more it builds a picture of your child, and it can really offer tailored advice and strategies, which, even though I've been doing this a long time, I'm still finding so helpful. And it's just given me a fresh pair of eyes on things and a fresh way of trying things.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I can't wait for them to build in the ability to upload your report so that you get a summary, a clear outcome, and what you need to do, which you can use. That would have been so useful to me, and that you can ask it to then download information for meetings you're going to, so that it can be that reminder, but it takes out all that like stressful thinking out of it. What if I don't remember something? Because it's there to remind you of everything.
Yeah. I think, we wouldn't have got involved if we weren't really confident on the difference it can make to families' lives, and we wouldn't be doing this. But it really can. I think it's going to bring so much to make this journey so much easier and to give the help that you need. And I love the fact that it's not just like, 9 to 5. You can use it 24 hours a day, and it's there and it can help you. And I already have been using it in the middle of the night when things feel really overwhelming, particularly at the moment with everything that's going on in our lives, just to get some top tips. And just it's got a nice calming voice, which sometimes at 3 in the morning you need. So no, it's been brilliant. So yeah, definitely use Neuly, because I think it could really help. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. We really hope that you've taken away something that's helpful, even if it's just knowing that you're not on your own in this journey.
If anything as we've talked about today has resonated with you, we'd love you to join the conversation in our Facebook group. Share your experiences, ask questions, or simply read along. You can just hover in there and read along what everybody else is saying. Sometimes knowing someone else understands can make all the difference.
Yeah, it really can. And that's exactly what we want Newly to be, more than just, virtual things. We want it to be a community where families support each other and celebrate those wins and help each other through those difficult days, and just remind each of us that we're not alone in this journey. That's what we're aiming to make Newly, and we really hope that you can join us in doing that. Thank you so much, time. Thank you for spending time with us today, and we will see you at the next Newly exchange.